After my election, there was talk of a post-racial America. And such a vision, however well intended, was never realistic. I've lived long enough to know that race relations are better than they were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, no matter what some folks say. But we're not where we need to be. And all of us have more work to do. If every economic issue is framed as a struggle between a hardworking white middle class and an undeserving minority, then workers of all shades are going to be left fighting for scraps while the wealthy withdraw further into their private enclaves.
Divide the rich versus poor, black versus white, old versus young, the politics of division of the Democratic Party. Now, the president tonight, focusing on race, he refused to address the tragic epidemic of violence that has devastated mostly African Americans in his hometown, an issue that has only gotten worse since he took office in 2009. President Obama, let's look at the facts. Let's look at the numbers. In just the first 10 days of 2017, 12 homicides have been reported. 81 people have been shot so far. And last year alone, a startling 762 homicides perpetrated in the Windy City in Chicago. Now, sadly, since January 2009, the month President Obama took office, Chicago has been ravaged. 3,929 murders. So why, for almost 8 years, has President Obama failed so miserably to curb violence in his own hometown? He barely mentioned it during the course of his presidency. Joining us now, radio talk show host James T. Harris and New York City mayoral candidate for the Democrats. He may end up being the first Democrat I support. James T. Harris, you know, the president talked about race a lot tonight, and he talked about the incendiary divisions in the country, and I would argue he was one of the most responsible, but he would insert himself from the beginning of his presidency. The Cambridge police acted stupidly. Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, Freddie Gray, Baltimore, Maryland, Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman. He was a four-time loser. And as an attorney, he rushed to judgment. No evidence, no facts, no due process for anybody, and he was wrong every time. Why didn't he focus on those numbers, nearly 4,000 killed in his own home city? Why did he focus rather on cases he ended up being wrong about that had a big racial component?
Because he couldn't, because his progressive policies would fail. Instead of inserting himself, I wish President Obama would have inserted, his family. In the last 8 years, have marriages increased in Chicago? In the last 8 years, have abortions decreased in the black community? In the last 8 years, have we seen more Americans of African descent graduate from high school? Have we seen less of them be incarcerated? The real problem in Chicago and across America, Sean, really is the breakdown of the family. If you had strong, intact families, I truly believe we would not see anywhere near the violence that we're experiencing in cities like Chicago.
This is just a fact. In the 8 years of the Obama presidency, African Americans, we have more African Americans out of the labor force, in poverty, on food stamps. I've given these statistics regularly. Why? Why was he unable to fulfill that promise?
Because in order to do that, he would have to talk about the black community's slavish devotion to progressive policies that have destroyed them since great government, since the 1960s, the civil rights movement, and the war on poverty. These policies have done more to destroy not just the black community, but the culture as a whole since they've been implemented.
That raises, James, another question, and Bo brought it up earlier, and that is the Black Lives Matter group. I mentioned the 4 high-profile race cases that he inserted himself into as an attorney and as the president. I think it was unwise, especially without due process or evidence being presented. But then he invites a group that is on tape chanting, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. I mean, what do we want, dead cops? When do we want them? How do you possibly justify the association as somebody that says he wants to be a racial healer and associating yourself with that?
You're supposed to be a racial healer. The argument was that it's going to be the great uniter, not the great divider. But with the progressive movement, we've already talked about it ad nauseum. It is to divide. It is to divide and conquer. And the race card has always been an easy card to play. Instead of talking about the issues that are at the heart of the problem, which I just mentioned, the family, what we do is we start to look at other areas like gun control. We'll look at other excuses. And the fact of the matter is, when you have Al Sharpton as your race czar, you can pretty pretty much understand what the design is. It is to create turmoil. It is to create chaos. And that's what we have seen on blast for the last 4 or 5 years of the Obama administration.